My name is Shoshana Meira Friedman. I am a rabbi at Temple Sinai of Brookline, Massachusetts. So a dominant image of the environmental movement, or if we think about Earth Day posters, shows human hands surrounding or holding a globe. And I used to take this for granted as a beautiful symbol, which it is, and it's certainly a step up from the idea of humans subjugating or dominating the Earth. But I also now believe that it's a bit problematic. First of all, because in these images, we see the Earth as though from space, which is beautiful, but we don't see the specifics of any one landscape. There's no sense of loyalty or connection to a specific place on the planet. And second of all, in this image, we are the ones in power. We're the helpers. And the Earth is sort of this helpless thing that's in our care, or perhaps you might say even in our possession. It's certainly not an image of partnership, even if it is trying to be an image of responsible stewardship. And then third, which is very interesting to me, this image that we see of this hands holding the Earth is completely disembodied. The hands aren't connected to any person usually, and certainly they're not connected to the planet that they're coming from. When we think about what happens in Vayikra and Leviticus, when God says, we cannot sell the land in perpetuity, ki li haaretz, because the land is mine, the land is God's. When I hear that verse applied to this image of the hands holding the Earth, I start to see the Earth, the globe, just expanding and becoming huge. And I see the hands getting smaller and smaller until they are in the arms of a person who's standing on a street corner, or perhaps digging in a garden, or walking a dog, or looking in the park for schach, for Sukkot. And then I trace those hands back, and a few billion years, there's some cells coming together out of this hot chemical mess of the primordial planet. Ki li haaretz, God says, the land is mine. God's voice is reminding us that if the land belongs to God, then so much more so we, who spring from this land, belong not only to God, but from the soil that we've come. One of my favorite quotes from the source book that Shua created for the Yovel, for the Jubilee, is from the Sifra, where it says, Al ta'asu atzmechem ikar, do not make yourselves foremost. I also think the translation, you're not such a big deal, or it's not all about you, might work for that Hebrew. In other words, the land is mine means that this whole story is not just about us. We are Adam. We come from Adamah. We come from the land. We don't exist without this place. We are not hands that are disembodied, that are somehow protecting the Earth as though from above. We are earthlings. And though we don't have roots, the elements of our bodies literally sprout out of the soil of this Earth. There is a book called Scripture, Culture, and Agriculture by the biblical scholar Ellen Davis, and it's had a big influence on how I understand Tanakh and the Hebrew Bible. She argues that the Tanakh is an agrarian text, and the word agrarian means that it is a text that is concerned primarily with the relationship of people and the particular land on which they live. She writes, and this is a direct quote, that the Bible as we have it could not have been written beside the irrigation canals of Babylon or the perennially flooding Nile. In other words, this is a place that is dependent on rain. It's a place that has seasonal aridity, periodic drought, it has thin topsoil, it's susceptible to erosion. And this is another direct quote, these mark the land of Canaan, writes Davis, as a place under the immediate particular care of God. This particular land, not the whole Earth, not something disembodied, but this particular ecosystem is joined to us as a Jewish people. And we can understand that the ancient Israelites who created the Tanakh were concerned about this land ethic. All of the language of covenant is connected to how healthy the land is. When we have drought or flooding, this is a sign that our behavior has not lived up to what God expected of us, that we've been in breach of a covenant. And again, this is so different from those disembodied hands of Earth Day. It becomes even more poignant when we apply this thinking to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, because one of the great tragedies of that conflict is that the question of who gets the land, who possesses the land, has become about demographics and nationalism and identity instead of what I think it was originally about, which was a sense of divine connection to a particular landscape, a particular soil and mountain and sea. And both Jews and Palestinians have loved this spit of land for generations, and both have tilled it and harvested from it and lived and died on it. And both profess to love the land itself. When I look at what's happening in the land of Israel, both inside and outside the Green Line, in places that some call Israel and some call Palestine, the sprawl of buildings, the draining of the rivers, desertification, the uprooting of trees, the destruction of springs and water sources, and the unjust distribution of water in the West Bank, problems with toxins, the distressing amount of litter that's left by Jews and other tourists on Israel's trails and parks. When I look at all of this, it looks a lot to me like those in power love the location of Israel. They love the general concept of that spit of land that is between the continents of Africa and Asia and Europe, but they don't necessarily love the land itself. And it certainly looks to me like the Israeli government wants room for Jews to live in the land mass that we call Israel and Palestine, but that the actual land itself and caring for that land and the people who depend on it is not necessarily high on everyone's list of priorities. The question, I think, should never be who owns the land. And we should know that as Jews. We should know that from Vayikra, Ki li haaretz, the land belongs to God. But the question can be who loves the land and who has the knowledge and wisdom to live well on the land and to teach others to do the same and to stay in that covenantal relationship with God and the land. And I hope and I think that the answer to that last question are people who identify both as Jews and Palestinians. And I so deeply wish that these two traumatized peoples could come together over their love of this land instead of having that love be what drives them apart. When land is subjugated and when we fall out of this holy relationship of mutuality with land that the Tanakh asks us to be in, history tells us it is never far off that people and other creatures will be subjugated too. And when a people who have lived and dwelled in a land for generations, who have tilled it and planted trees and found water sources, when those people are subjugated, it is rarely far off that the land will be degraded as well.